The sky above the sprawling plains of the Texas Panhandle was a relentless pale blue sheet, unbroken by a single cloud. It was 1888, and the land was a furnace. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything. The gnarled branches of scrub brush, the wilting blades of what was once grass, and the sweat-streaked face of Ethan Stone. His once brown leather hat was now bleached to a pale tan, and the bandana around his neck was a permanent fixture, pulled up to shield his mouth and nose from the grit that seemed to hang in the very air he breathed. Ethan's ranch, the Double S, was dying a slow, painful death. The last rain had fallen 4 months ago, a cruel, mocking drizzle that barely settled the dust before it evaporated. Now the water troughs were cracked and empty, and the once vibrant pastures were a sea of brittle, yellowed stalks. His herd of longhorns, his life's work, were nothing but bony skeletons covered in hide. They moved with a listless slowness, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that clung to the air like a pall. Every day he lost another 2 or 3, their hollow-eyed bodies a grim testament to the land's unforgiving nature. Despair was a dry, bitter taste in his mouth. He had a family to feed, his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children, Lily and Sam. He'd sunk every last cent into this land, this dream of building a legacy, but the dream was turning to dust right before his eyes. He'd ridden for days, checking every corner of his property and neighboring ranches, but there was nothing. The creeks were dry, and the few remaining watering holes were muddy pits where the sickliest cattle went to die. One evening, as the sun bled a fiery orange across the horizon, Ethan sat on his porch, the old wood groaning under his weight. Sarah brought him a tin cup of weak coffee. Her face was etched with the same worry he felt, a weariness that went bone deep. She didn't need to say a word. He knew what she was thinking. They couldn't hold on much longer. "I'm riding north tomorrow," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Heard there's a spring up by the old Comanche lands. Might be enough to get 'em through." Sarah's eyes widened. "Ethan, you can't. That's sacred land. They say the Comanche still patrol those hills. No one goes there." "They say a lot of things," he retorted, a harsh edge to his voice. "And none of them are as hungry as my children." He took a long, hot sip of his coffee. "I've got no choice, Sarah. It's that, or we lose everything." He saw the fear in her eyes, a reflection of his own. But she knew him well enough to know his mind was made up. He was a man of the land, and the land was a harsh master. When it demanded something, you answered. The next morning, before the first sliver of light touched the horizon, Ethan was saddled up. He led a small group of his strongest cattle, hoping to find a source of water to bring back to the rest. The journey was slow and agonizing. The cattle stumbled, their hooves dragging through the dust, their low moans a constant sorrowful chorus. By the 3rd day, they had left the familiar parched territory behind. The landscape began to change, subtly at first, then more dramatically. The scrub brush became thicker, and the occasional cottonwood tree, though still thirsty, offered a hint of life. The air felt different here, cooler, as if a memory of rain lingered in the valleys. But still, the land was dry. He consulted his faded map, a hand-drawn relic passed down from his grandfather. It showed a small, unmarked area in the north, a place of mystery and legend. The Whispering Hills, it was called. It was said to be a place of ancient springs, a source of life that never dried up. But it was also a place where no white man dared to tread. The Comanche, according to the tales, were fierce and unforgiving guardians of their ancestral lands. Ethan pushed on, his desperation overriding his caution. The sun was a hammer on his head, and he felt the familiar throb of dehydration. His own canteen was nearly empty. He had to find water, for his herd, for his family. He crested a low hill, and his heart gave a lurch. Below, in a shallow basin, a small creek bed was completely dry, its stones bleached white. But a few hundred yards further, nestled between 2 steep rock formations, he saw it. A faint shimmer, the unmistakable gleam of water. A spring. His tired mind filled with the image of his family's faces, his children laughing, his wife smiling. He was almost there. Just as he urged his horse forward, a sudden tremor in the earth made the ground shake. He looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. A massive rock slide, triggered by the dry, crumbling earth, was thundering down the canyon wall he had just passed. He had time for a single thought. This is it. Before a loose rock, the size of a man's head, caught him on the side of his head. The world tilted. a chaotic mess of sound and color, and then darkness. Pain was the first thing Ethan felt, a dull, throbbing ache behind his eyes, a searing burn across his scalp. The second thing he felt was the silence. It wasn't the deafening roar of a rock slide, but a stillness so profound it felt unnatural. He opened his eyes and the world was a blur of hazy light. He tried to move, and a sharp jolt of pain shot through his body. He was lying on his back, the hard ground pressing into him. Above, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, the first stars just beginning to prick the darkening canvas. He was alive. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. His head felt like it had been split open, and he reached up, his fingers coming away sticky with blood. The rock slide had missed him by a hair, but it had caught his horse. The animal lay motionless, a grim testament to his narrow escape. The small herd of cattle he had brought with him had scattered, their lowing lost in the vast empty expanse. Ethan was alone, and he was in a place no white man was supposed to be. He staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. The spring was tantalizingly close, a promise of salvation he could almost taste. He stumbled towards it, his boots scuffing on the loose rocks. He reached the edge of the small pool, and with a grunt of exhaustion, knelt down. He cupped his hands and brought the cool, clean water to his lips. It was the most glorious thing he had ever tasted. He drank until his stomach ached, then splashed some on his face, trying to wash away the grime and the pain. As he looked up, a shadow fell over him. He froze, his hand still dripping with water. He looked up, and his heart hammered against his ribs. Standing on a rock ledge above him, silhouetted against the last of the light, was a figure, a woman. She was wrapped in a simple woven blanket, her long black hair braided with thin strips of hide and feathers. Her face was painted with a pattern he didn't recognize, and her expression was unreadable. She held a spear, its tip glinting in the fading light. It was Lysandra, the Comanche curandera. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through his exhaustion. He had heard the stories. The Comanche were warriors, and this was their sacred land. He was an intruder, a trespasser. He fully expected the spear to come flying at him, a swift and final end to his journey, but it didn't. She simply stood there, a silent sentinel, watching him. He could feel her gaze, intense and assessing. He slowly stood up, raising his hands in a gesture of peace, a desperate plea for his life. "I didn't mean any harm," he rasped, his throat raw. I was looking for water." She didn't respond. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to bore into his very soul. He saw no malice there, only a profound stillness. She moved with an easy grace, a predator in her own territory, and she began to descend the rocks towards him. He tensed, ready to run, but his body was still a protest of pain. There was nowhere to go. She stopped a few feet away from him, her gaze dropping to the blood caked on his forehead. She pointed a finger at the wound, then at the dead horse, and finally at the scattered herd of cattle. She spoke in a language he couldn't understand, a low melodic series of sounds. He shook his head, a gesture of futility. I don't understand," he stammered. Lysandra took a step closer. She held out her hand, palm up. He hesitated. Then, seeing no threat, he slowly lowered his own hand, allowing her to inspect the wound on his head. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, her fingers cool against his hot skin. She tilted his head, examining the gash. She spoke again, a single word this time. "Wounded." He nodded. "Yes, the rock, it hit me." He pointed to the canyon wall. She turned and looked at the wall, then back at him. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He had not come with a weapon, only with desperation. He was no soldier, no land grabber, just a man who had made a mistake. She turned and began to walk away, a few steps towards the trees. He stared after her, confused. Was she leaving him to die? Was this a test? Then she stopped and looked back at him, her hand held out in a clear gesture. She was inviting him to follow. He had no choice. He was lost, injured, and alone in a land he knew nothing about. He could stay and die, or he could take a chance on the woman who had not killed him on sight. He took a deep breath, winced at the pain in his ribs, and began to follow her into the deepening shadows of the canyon. The air grew cooler as they walked deeper into the canyon. The light was almost gone now, and the stars were beginning to glitter with a fierce brilliance against the velvet black sky. He followed her for what felt like an eternity. his legs aching with every step. He was a rancher, accustomed to hard labor, but this was a new kind of exhaustion. He stumbled and she turned her eyes on him. She said something, her voice soft but firm, and he thought he understood the meaning. Keep going. They reached a small sheltered cave, hidden behind a curtain of tangled vines. A small fire was already burning within, casting a warm, flickering light on the walls. He saw woven mats and bundles of herbs, and he realized this was her camp. She gestured for him to sit, and he sank to the ground, his body giving out. He was safe, for now. He looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. He had no idea what her intentions were, but for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. He had stumbled into sacred land, and a woman who was supposed to be his enemy had not taken his life. She had saved it. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the darkness, a small, defiant light against the vast, star-strewn sky. Lysandra moved with an economy of motion, her every step deliberate and purposeful. She knelt beside Ethan, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. She had a small deerskin pouch at her waist, and she carefully pulled out a handful of dried leaves and crushed herbs. The air filled with a pungent, earthy scent. Ethan watched her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion. He had been taught to fear the Comanche, to see them as savages, as a threat to everything he held dear. But this woman was nothing like the monsters of the stories. Her hands, though calloused, were gentle as she began to clean the gash on his head with a piece of clean cloth dipped in water. The process stung, but the coolness of the water was a relief. She mixed the herbs in a small bowl, adding a few drops of water from a gourd. The paste she created was dark and thick. She spoke to him again, her voice a soft murmur. "This will make it well," she said, her English halting and accented, but clear. "Good medicine." He nodded, a lump in his throat. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice raw. She didn't acknowledge his thanks. She simply took a piece of rawhide and pressed the poultice onto his wound, securing it with a careful hand. The cooling sensation was immediate, a deep, soothing relief. She then tended to the cuts and bruises on his arms and legs, applying a different balm that smelled of pine. She worked in silence, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she was finished, she offered him a small, carved wooden bowl. It contained a dark, warm broth. "Eat," she commanded softly. He was ravenous, the hunger a hollow ache in his gut. He took the bowl and sipped the broth. It tasted of wild herbs and something else, something he couldn't quite place. It was nourishing and warm, a balm for his weary soul as much as for his body. He ate slowly, savoring every drop. As he ate, he studied her. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe in her early 20s. Her face was strong with high cheekbones and a proud, straight nose. Her eyes held a deep wisdom, a sadness that seemed to have been born of the land itself. She sat on the opposite side of the fire, her legs crossed, watching him with an intensity that made him feel as if she were reading his thoughts. He finished the broth and set the bowl down. He felt stronger, the pain in his head and body receding to a dull throb. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Ethan Stone." She nodded. "I am Lysandra." I apologize for being here. I didn't mean to trespass," he said, gesturing around the cave. "The drought, it's bad. My cattle are dying. My family is hungry." He saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. The drought was a shared enemy, a universal force that didn't distinguish between Comanche and white men. "The land is dying," she said, her English still slow and careful. "Our springs, they are weak, but we know where to find the last water." Is that what this is?" he asked, gesturing to the spring. She nodded. "It is a place of healing, a place of peace. My people, they protect it. It is where we find strength." He looked down at his hands, a deep shame washing over him. He had come here out of desperation, but his arrival had been an act of violation. He had ridden into a place of sanctuary, a place of peace, with a singular, selfish need. And yet, she had saved him. "Why?" he asked, looking up at her. "Why did you help me? I'm a white man. One of them." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes steady. "You are a man," she said simply. "You were hurt. You were thirsty. The land, it tells us to help those who are in need. The Great Spirit, it gives us medicine to heal. We do not turn our backs on a man who is lost." Her words were a stark contrast to the narratives he had grown up with. He had been raised on tales of savage attacks, of broken treaties, of a war for a land they believed was theirs by divine right. He had never considered that the people on the other side had their own truths, their own deep connection to the earth and to each other. The silence that followed was not awkward but contemplative. He began to see her not as a representative of a feared people, but as an individual, a woman with a name, a voice, a purpose. He saw the firelight glint in her eyes, the intricate patterns of her beaded dress, the subtle strength in her posture. He realized that the world he knew was not the only world that existed. As the night wore on, the fire's warmth lulled him into a state of semi-consciousness. He lay on the woven mat she had provided, his mind slowly untangling the knots of his own prejudices. The sounds of the night, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of a nocturnal animal, were no longer a threat. They were a part of a larger whole, a symphony of a living, breathing land. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the scent of herbs filling his nostrils, the kindness of a stranger, a surprising and comforting presence in his world. The morning sun, filtered through the thick canopy of leaves, cast a dappled golden light inside the cave. Ethan woke with a start, the memory of the past few days hitting him like a physical blow. The rock slide, the spring, the silent woman who had saved his life. He touched the bandage on his head. The throbbing was gone, replaced by a dull ache. The poultice had worked its magic. He sat up, his body still stiff, but much more mobile than the day before. Lysandra was already up, sitting by the dying embers of the fire, her back to him. She was grinding something with a pestle and mortar, a low rhythmic sound that was both peaceful and strange. He looked out of the cave opening and saw his boots, cleaned of dust and caked mud, sitting neatly by the entrance. A small gourd filled with fresh water was beside them. He took a moment to absorb the scene, the quiet care she had taken. She had not only saved his life, but had also looked after him in his unconscious state. He felt a wave of profound gratitude, mixed with a growing sense of unease. He was indebted to her, a Comanche woman, and the weight of that truth felt heavier than any rock. He cleared his throat. Lysandra didn't startle. She simply finished what she was doing, placed the mortar on a flat stone, and turned to face him. Her expression was the same as the night before, unreadable, yet not unkind. "You are stronger," she observed. "Yes, thank you for everything," he said, his voice earnest. I don't know how to repay you." She gestured to the surrounding landscape with a sweep of her hand. "This land, it gives us what we need. We must give back. We do not ask for payment." Her words were a challenge to everything he knew about the world, a world of transactions, of debts, of land ownership and monetary exchange. He was a rancher, a man who measured his worth in acres and head of cattle. Her philosophy was completely alien, and yet it was what had saved him. "I need to get back," he said, the reality of his situation setting in. "My family, they'll be worried. And my herd." Lysandra's gaze softened. "Your cattle, they are safe." Shy people found them. They led them to a hidden pasture near a stream. Ethan's mouth fell open. His cattle, the very animals that had led him to this dangerous place, were not lost. They had been found and cared for by the very people he had been warned to fear. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They were hungry. Thirsty," she explained. "We do not let any creature suffer." She gestured toward a small fire pit outside the cave. "My brother, 2 Arrows, he brought food. He is a hunter. He watched you last night from the trees." A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. He had been watched the whole time. He had been completely at the mercy of this tribe. He thought of all the stories, all the warnings, and a new kind of fear, born of helplessness, took root. Lysandra seemed to sense his fear. "Do not be afraid, Ethan Stone. You are a guest. You did not come with a gun in your hand. You came to survive. We understand that." Her words eased his mind, but only slightly. The fragile truce between them felt like it could shatter at any moment. "I need to go home," he repeated, the urgency growing. He stood up, testing his legs. They were still shaky, but they held him. "You cannot go alone," she said. "The land, it is full of danger. 2 Arrows will guide you. It is a long way." He hesitated. A Comanche warrior leading him through their sacred lands. It felt like a trap, a slow descent into the unknown. But what other choice did he have? He was 100 miles from home, his horse was dead, and he was still weak. He was a man who prided himself on his independence, but here, in this unforgiving wilderness, he was utterly dependent on the kindness of strangers. "Thank you," he said again, the words feeling inadequate. She simply nodded. "We will leave at dawn." She turned and went back to her work, her movements graceful and unhurried. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself sitting by the cave entrance, watching the world around him. He saw things he had never noticed before, the way the light changed the color of the rock formations, the intricate patterns of a spider's web glistening with dew, the quiet, almost reverent way Lysandra moved through the trees as she collected herbs. She was a part of this land, not just a dweller on it. She understood its secrets, its rhythms. The afternoon passed in a quiet stillness. He ate a meal of roasted rabbit and wild greens, simple food that tasted better than any steak he had ever cooked. He saw 2 arrows from a distance, a tall, silent figure who moved with the effortless grace of a hunter. He didn't approach Ethan, simply watched from a distance. The respect between the siblings was a silent, powerful force. That night, as the fire burned low, Ethan sat with Lysandra and spoke. He told her about his ranch, about Sarah and the children, about the crushing weight of the drought. He spoke of his hope and his fears, a confession he had never shared with anyone, not even his wife. He felt a deep need to explain himself, to justify his desperation, to be seen not as an invader but as a human being struggling to survive. Lysandra listened, her dark eyes fixed on him, saying nothing. When he finished, she simply said, "We all carry our own storms, Ethan Stone. Some are of the sky, some are of the heart." Her words were a simple, profound truth. They were not so different after all. They were both children of a land that was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, a land that demanded respect and gave no quarter. He realized that the truce between them was not just fragile, it was a bridge, built one word at a time, over a chasm of fear and prejudice. The journey back was a slow, deliberate trudge through a landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. Ethan, now on a sturdy borrowed horse, rode alongside 2 arrows, a silent and watchful guide. The Comanche warrior was a man of few words, his presence a quiet force of nature. He moved with an effortless grace that was a stark contrast to Ethan's own weary rigidity. They rode through canyons etched by wind and water, past rock formations that looked like ancient sleeping giants. The land here was a tapestry of colors. The deep red of sandstone, the pale green of stunted pines, and the shocking, almost violent blue of the sky. Ethan had never seen this part of the country before. He had always seen it from a distance, a menacing, forbidden territory on the edge of his world. Now he was seeing it up close, a place of profound and desolate beauty. 2 arrows pointed out things Ethan would have never noticed. The faint tracks of a passing cougar, a nest of eagles high in a rocky crag, the subtle changes in the wind that foretold a shift in the weather. He spoke in quiet, clipped English, his words precise and to the point. "The land, it speaks. You must listen." Ethan, a man who had spent his life trying to bend the land to his will, was forced to listen. He saw how 2 arrows moved with it, not against it. He saw how he read the signs, how he found water in unexpected places, and how he lived in harmony with the natural world. It was a lesson in humility, a stark and powerful counterpoint to the aggressive expansionism he had always known. They camped by a small stream, a sliver of life cutting through the arid landscape. 2 arrows built a fire with a few strokes of flint and steel, and soon the aroma of roasting rabbit filled the air. Ethan, a rancher who lived on beef and biscuits, found himself eating with a gusto he hadn't felt in months. The food was simple, but it was honest. It was a product of a life lived in tune with the earth, a life he had never considered possible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ethan broke the silence. "Your sister, she is a good woman, a good healer." 2 Arrow's face, which was usually a stoic mask, softened. "Lysandra, she has a gift from the Great Spirit. She can hear the spirits of the land. She knows what herbs to use, what songs to sing. She heals not only the body, but the spirit." "She saved my life," Ethan said, the words a simple truth. "And she saved my herd." 2 Arrows looked at him, his dark eyes penetrating. "You are not a bad man, Ethan Stone. You are a man who is lost. You came to our land with no hate in your heart. You came to save your family. We see that. We do not turn our backs on a man with a good heart. The words resonated deep within Ethan. He had always thought of the Comanche as a faceless, hostile force, but here was a man, a brother, who saw him not as an enemy, but as a fellow human being. The prejudices he had held for so long were beginning to crumble, replaced by a growing respect and a gnawing sense of guilt. They continued their journey, riding in a comfortable silence. The days blurred into one another, a rhythm of riding, eating and sleeping under a sky full of a million stars. Ethan found himself learning to read the land, to recognize the different bird calls, to identify the different plants. He was no longer just a man passing through. He was a student of this ancient, beautiful place. Finally, on the 5th day, Two Arrows stopped. "This is where we part ways, Ethan Stone. Your land, it is over that hill. The stream will lead you to your herd. They are there, safe." Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and a strange sadness. He had a family to get back to, a ranch to save. But this journey, this time spent with a people he had once feared, had changed him. He was not the same man who had ridden into the canyon in a blind fit of desperation. He dismounted and stood face to face with Two Arrows. He reached out his hand, a gesture he had never thought he would make. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will never forget your kindness. I will never forget your sister's kindness." Two Arrows took his hand in a firm, calloused grip. "May the Great Spirit guide you, Ethan Stone, and may you remember that the land, it is a gift, not a thing to be owned." He released Ethan's hand, a small, knowing smile on his face, and turned his horse. He rode away, a solitary figure disappearing into the vastness of the prairie. Ethan watched him go, a profound sense of gratitude and respect in his heart. He was a different man now. He had not only found water for his herd, he had found a new way to see the world. He turned his horse and headed towards the hill, a man changed by the unexpected grace of a people he had once called enemies. The sight of his ranch house, a small weathered silhouette on the horizon, was a sight for sore eyes. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. What would he find? Would his family be okay? The last 5 days had been a surreal journey through a world he never knew existed, but now the hard reality of his own life was rushing back to meet him. He urged his horse forward, the animal sensing the end of the journey. He saw the faint outline of a stream, and then his eyes welled up with tears of relief. The herd was there, a sea of bony bodies gathered around a small but gushing creek. His herd was alive. He dismounted and knelt by the stream, running his hands through the clear, cool water. The land was still parched, the earth cracked and dry, but here a small miracle had occurred. The Comanche had not just saved his life, they had saved his livelihood. He rode the last few hundred yards to the house. The sight of Sarah standing on the porch, her hands clutched together, was a sight that made his heart ache. She had been worried, he knew. He dismounted and she ran to him, her face a mask of relief. "Ethan! Oh, Ethan, I thought you were gone," she cried, her arms wrapping around his neck. He held her close, the scent of her hair a familiar comfort. "I'm here, Sarah. I'm okay." She pulled back, her eyes scanning his face. She saw the gash on his forehead, the weariness in his eyes, and a host of questions formed on her lips. But she didn't ask them. Not yet. She just held him, her body a testament to the fear she had endured. He saw Lily and Sam peeking out from behind the screen door, their eyes wide with relief. He knelt and opened his arms, and they came running, their small bodies a warm weight against him. He was home. He was safe. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, he sat on the porch with Sarah, the darkness of the night a backdrop for his story. He told her everything, the drought, his desperate ride into the sacred lands, the rock slide, his rescue by Lysandra, the days spent with Two Arrows, and the unbelievable kindness they had shown him. He watched her face as he spoke, seeing her disbelief, her fear, and her eventual wonder. They saved you. A Comanche woman," she whispered, the name a foreign sound on her tongue. "Yes, and they led the herd to water. Our cattle are alive because of them." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. She had been raised on the same stories he had, stories of conflict, of savages who had no place in their civilized world. Now her husband had been saved by the very people they had been taught to fear. "I don't understand," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and awe. "Why? Why would they help you?" "I don't know for sure," he admitted, "but Lysandra said something that stayed with me. She said I came with no hate in my heart, just to survive. They saw me as a man, not as an enemy." He looked at the vast star-filled sky. "We have to do something, Sarah. We owe them." The next morning, Ethan woke with a sense of purpose. He was a different man, and his priorities had shifted. He spent the day mending fences, tending to the herd, and making sure everything was in order. He felt a newfound respect for his land, a deep appreciation for the gift he had been given. But his mind was not on his ranch. It was on the vast, empty plains to the north. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back. He had to thank them, to offer them something in return. It was a debt he couldn't repay with money, a gesture that had to come from the heart. He spent the next few days preparing. He selected his best horse, packed provisions, and gathered a small offering, a beautifully crafted silver belt buckle, an heirloom from his grandfather, and a sack of flour and sugar, a luxury in the harsh frontier life. He knew it was a small offering, but it was all he had. Sarah watched him, her worry returning. "Ethan, are you sure? It's a dangerous thing to do." "I have to, Sarah. It's about honor, about respect." He looked at her, his eyes steady. "They trusted me. I have to show them that their trust was not misplaced." She knew there was no talking him out of it. This was not a rash decision. It was a matter of his very soul. He had gone into the wild a desperate rancher, and he had come back a man transformed. She nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. The next day, as the sun rose, Ethan mounted his horse and headed north. He was not riding into the unknown, but back to a place he had been a stranger, and to people he now considered his allies. He was a man with a purpose, to repay a debt of kindness, to build a bridge where there had once been only a chasm. He was not just a rancher anymore. He was a man with a new destiny, a destiny intertwined with the very people he had once feared. The sun was high in the sky when Ethan reached the entrance of the canyon, the same place where his life had nearly ended and had been reborn. He dismounted, tied his horse to a sturdy rock, and took a deep breath. The air, though still dry, held a memory of a different, more spiritual presence. He felt a sense of reverence, a feeling he hadn't known since he was a boy in Sunday school. He had ridden for days, retracing his steps with a clarity that surprised him. The journey back had been a testament to his newfound connection with the land. He saw the trail in a way he never had before, a subtle tapestry of broken twigs and flattened grass that only a man who had truly listened could see. He walked into the canyon, the pack on his back feeling heavier with every step. He reached the sacred spring, the place where Lysandra had found him, and a profound silence settled over him. The water was still there, a living, breathing testament to the power of the land. He saw the faint outline of the rockslide, a scar on the canyon wall, a reminder of the day that had changed everything. He didn't know what he was expecting. A village? A small encampment? But there was nothing. The place was empty, a silent sanctuary. He felt a pang of disappointment, a frustration that he had come all this way and had missed them. He was about to turn back when he heard it, the faint sound of a drum, a low, rhythmic beat that seemed to vibrate in the very air. He followed the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved deeper into the canyon, his boots silent on the soft earth. The sound grew louder, a steady, hypnotic beat. He rounded a bend in the canyon and froze. Before him was a sight that took his breath away. A small group of people were gathered in a wide, sheltered cove. There were men, women, and children, all dressed in woven blankets and decorated leather. They were sitting in a circle around a central fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Lysandra was there, her long hair braided with feathers, her face serene. 2 arrows sat opposite her, his expression a familiar mixture of stillness and strength. They were singing a low, mournful chant that spoke of the land, of the sky, of a connection that went back centuries. They were not celebrating, they were mourning. He saw the sadness in their eyes, the quiet despair. He remembered what Lysandra had said. The land is dying, our springs that they are weak. He had come to offer a gift, a symbol of his gratitude, but he had stumbled into a place of grief. He felt like an intruder, a stark, white-faced anomaly in their ancient world. He hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should he leave? Should he announce himself? Lysandra, as if sensing his presence, looked up. Her eyes met his, and a flicker of recognition, followed by a faint surprise, crossed her face. She stopped singing, and the others, one by one, fell silent. The drum beat faded to a low thrum and then stopped. All eyes turned to him. The silence was deafening, a thick, heavy blanket of tension. He stood there, a man from a different world in a place of sacred sorrow. He felt the weight of history, of all the broken treaties, the stolen lands, the countless acts of betrayal, all focused on him. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. He had to show them he was not a threat, that he had come in peace. He slowly unhooked the sack of flour and sugar from his pack and placed it on the ground. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he unbuckled the silver belt buckle from his belt and held it out in his hand, a small, shining offering. Lysandra rose, her movements fluid and graceful. She walked towards him, her gaze unwavering. She didn't take the buckle. She simply looked at it, then at him, a question in her eyes. "It's for you," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "A thank you, for saving my life, for saving my herd. It's an old family heirloom. It's all I have to offer." Lysandra looked at the ground, at the bag of flour and sugar. The people were hungry, he knew. She then looked at the belt buckle, a symbol of his world, a thing of beauty and value. She looked back at him, a silent question in her eyes. "Why? Why do you give us these things?" He swallowed hard. "Because you showed me kindness when you didn't have to. You treated me as a man in need. You saved me when the world I knew had turned its back on me." He was not speaking just to her, but to all of them. "You taught me that we're all a part of this land, that we're all just trying to survive." A man's face, etched with age and wisdom, a respected elder of the tribe, looked at Lysandra. He spoke in a low, guttural voice. Lysandra listened, then turned back to Ethan. "My people, they do not understand this gift. They do not know your world." She looked at the silver buckle in his hand. "We do not need silver. We need rain." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Of course, he had been so wrapped up in his own sense of honor and debt that he had forgotten the true nature of their suffering. He had brought them symbols of his wealth, his world, when what they truly needed was life itself. The gifts were meaningless. "I know," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of humility. I'm sorry. I have nothing to offer you that you truly need. I came here to thank you, to show you that I will never forget." Lysandra's expression softened. She knelt and picked up the bag of flour, her fingers brushing against the coarse cloth. She then turned and placed the bag by the fire. The others watched, their faces a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. She looked back at Ethan and gestured for him to sit. "You are our guest, Ethan Stone. Sit, rest. We will eat together." He sat, his heart filled with a deep sense of a different kind of purpose. He was not there to pay a debt. He was there to build a bridge, to sit with the people who had saved him and to learn from them. The silver buckle was no longer a symbol of his world. It was a token of his gratitude, a silent promise of a better future. The fire cast a warm, hypnotic glow on the faces gathered in the circle. The atmosphere, once thick with tension and suspicion, had shifted. The gift of flour, a simple but essential item in a time of scarcity, had been a gesture of good faith. It was a tangible thing, a promise of a meal to be shared. The Comanche people, though wary, had accepted Ethan's presence, not as a threat, but as an unusual and unexpected event. Lysandra and an older woman, a respected elder, worked together, mixing the flour with water and a bit of dried meat to make small flat cakes. The rich smell of the cooking bread filled the air, a scent of sustenance and life. They offered Ethan one, and he ate it gratefully, savoring its simple, earthy taste. He felt a deep sense of connection, a silent communion with these people who had so unexpectedly become a part of his life. As they ate, the elder of the tribe, a man with a weathered face and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 sunsets, spoke to Lysandra in their language. She listened intently, her head bowed in respect, and then turned to Ethan. "My people, they want to know of your world, of the land you call yours. They ask why the sky is so empty, why the rain does not come." Ethan felt a pang of shared sorrow. They were all suffering from the same affliction. He spoke, his voice low and honest, about the parched fields, the dying cattle, the dust storms that choked the air. He told them about the despair of his family, the fear that their life's work would turn to dust. He didn't embellish or exaggerate. He simply spoke the truth. Lysandra translated his words, and a low murmur of understanding rippled through the circle. The Comanche people, who had their own stories of struggle and loss, understood the pain of a man watching his life wither away. The elder spoke again. Lysandra translated, "He says, the land is angry. The Great Spirit is not pleased with what the white man has done. He says you have taken and you have not given back. You have built fences on a land that should be free. You have cut down the trees. You have hunted the buffalo to almost nothing. He asks, what have you given in return?" The question hung in the air, a powerful indictment. Ethan had no good answer. He had been a part of a culture that had taken and taken, a culture that had seen the land as a commodity, not as a living, breathing entity. He felt a deep, profound shame. I have nothing to give back," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I am just one man. I have a family to feed. But I see now. I see what we have done. I see what I have done." He looked at Lysandra. "You told me the land is a gift. My people, we see it as something to be owned, something to be conquered." He looked around the circle, his gaze meeting theirs. "I was wrong. We were all wrong." The elder looked at him for a long moment, a silent assessment in his eyes. He spoke to Lysandra again, his voice softer this time. She turned to Ethan. He says, "A man who can admit his wrongs, that is a man who can learn. You have come to our land in a different way, Ethan Stone. You have come to learn, and that is a powerful gift." The tension in the circle evaporated. The air felt lighter, filled with a new kind of understanding. They talked for hours, not as adversaries, but as fellow survivors on a dying land. They spoke of the changing seasons, the dwindling water sources, the animals that had disappeared. They were no longer two different worlds. They were two sides of the same coin, sharing a common burden. As the night wore on, the fire's warmth began to lull Ethan into a state of contented exhaustion. He felt a profound peace, a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. He was in a place that should have been hostile, with people he should have feared, but he felt safe. He felt at home. The elder spoke again. Lysandra translated. He says, "You are a part of this story now, Ethan Stone. Our stories are connected. You found us when you were at your lowest. We found you. You are no longer just a rancher from the south. You are a friend of the Comanche." The words were a powerful and emotional declaration. They had accepted him, a man they should have despised, into their circle. They had seen his heart, his desperation, and his willingness to learn. They had not only saved his life, they had offered him a new one. He looked at the faces around him, illuminated by the firelight. He saw the scars of a hard life, the wisdom of a people who had endured centuries of hardship, and he saw hope. He saw a future where they could coexist, where they could help each other, where the land could be healed. He lay back on the woven mat they had provided, the sense of wood smoke and wild herbs, a soothing perfume in the night air. He closed his eyes, his mind no longer filled with the frantic worry of a dying ranch, but with a quiet sense of purpose. He was a rancher, yes, but he was also a friend of the Comanche, and that, he realized, was a legacy worth more than all the cattle in Texas. The morning air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the previous days. Ethan woke to the low, guttural murmur of conversation and the smell of coffee. His eyes fluttered open to see Lysandra sitting by the fire, a small, steaming tin cup in her hands. She offered it to him, her face a serene mask. "It is a gift," she said, her voice soft, "from our people to yours." He took the cup, its warmth a welcome sensation against his cold hands. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was a gesture of profound kindness. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He spent the morning talking with Lysandra, learning more about her people. She spoke of their history, their connection to the land, their ceremonies and their beliefs. She spoke of the encroaching white settlers, of the broken promises, and the quiet fear that their way of life was slowly disappearing. "We do not hate you, Ethan Stone," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "We fear what you represent. We fear the fences that separate the land. We fear the men who see the land only for what they can take from it." Her words were a simple, honest truth. She was not accusing him personally, but rather the forces that had driven him to their land in the first place. He felt a sense of responsibility, a burden that was not his to bear alone, but one he could no longer ignore. He spoke to her of his own fears, of his love for the land and his desire to build a life for his family. He explained that his people had also come here seeking a new life, a new beginning. He made her understand that for many, it was not about taking, but about building. He spoke of the common ground they shared, the deep emotional connection to the land that sustained them both. As the day progressed, a small group of warriors, led by 2 arrows, approached the encampment. They had been on patrol keeping watch over the sacred lands. Their faces were stoic, their eyes watchful. Ethan felt a flicker of the old fear, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of respect. These were not savages, they were guardians. 2 arrows walked to him, his face still a stoic mask. He held out a bundle wrapped in a hide. "This is for you, Ethan Stone. A new life for your horse." Ethan took the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside were 2 pairs of beautifully crafted moccasins, soft and supple, and a new saddle made of tanned deer hide and adorned with intricate beadwork. "This is—" "I can't accept this," he stammered. "It is a gift," 2 arrows said, his voice firm. "From our people. A gift for a friend. May your path be true and your horse be strong." The generosity was overwhelming. They had given him shelter, food, and now they were giving him the tools he needed to get home. He felt a profound sense of indebtedness, not a debt to be repaid with money, but with a promise. He looked at Lysandra, then at 2 arrows, and then at the faces of the people gathered around the fire. He had to say something. He had to make a promise. He stood up, his heart pounding. "I want to thank you for everything, for your kindness, your generosity, and your wisdom. I came here a man in need. I came here with nothing, and you gave me everything. You saved my life. You saved my ranch. And you taught me that the land is not a thing to be owned, but a living, breathing being that must be respected." He looked at the sky, still a pale, cloudless expanse. "I can't bring you rain. I have no magic. But I will do this. I will tell my people. I will tell them of the kindness you have shown me. I will tell them that you are not our enemies. I will tell them that we can live in peace. And I will tell them that the land belongs to us all, to be shared, not taken." A low cheer, a deep rumbling sound of approval went up from the circle. The elder rose to his feet and walked to Ethan. He placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke in a low voice. Lysandra translated, her own voice filled with emotion. He says, "May your words be like seeds on the wind. May they travel far, and may they bring us all the promise of rain. Go, Ethan Stone, and do not forget your promise. Your path is a new one now. Walk it well." Ethan stood there, a man transformed, a man with a new purpose. He had come here in desperation, seeking water. He was leaving with a new understanding, a new sense of purpose. He was not just a rancher, he was a messenger, and he knew with a certainty he had never felt before that his life and the life of his family was forever intertwined with the people who had saved him. He had not just survived a rock slide, he had been given a new beginning. The ride back to the Double S Ranch was a silent, contemplative journey. Ethan felt the weight of the moccasins on his feet and the new saddle beneath him, not as a gift, but as a responsibility. He was no longer just a rancher on a mission to save his herd. He was a man carrying a story, a message that could change minds and hearts, or be dismissed as the wild ravings of a man who had been out in the sun too long. He rode for days, the familiar landmarks of his world slowly coming into view. The land was still bone-dry, the air still thick with dust, a stark contrast to the small, vibrant oasis he had left behind. He saw other ranchers, their faces grim and weary, their cattle a grim procession of walking skeletons. They nodded to him, their eyes hollow with the same despair he had felt just a few weeks ago. He wanted to stop, to tell them his story, to offer a glimmer of hope, but he knew they wouldn't believe him. Not yet. He needed a plan. He needed to prove that the Comanche were not the monsters of the stories. He needed to show his community that the very people they feared were the ones who had saved him. He reached the ranch as the sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the landscape. Sarah ran to him, her face a mixture of relief and concern. She saw the new saddle and moccasins, a silent question in her eyes. He dismounted, his legs stiff, and hugged her tightly. "I have a lot to tell you," he said, his voice low, "and a lot to do." That night, after the children were asleep, he laid out the new saddle on the floor, the intricate beadwork shimmering in the lamplight. Sarah traced the patterns with her fingers, a look of awe on her face. He recounted the entire story again, this time with a new layer of detail. He spoke of Lysandra's wisdom, of Two Arrows' strength, of the elders' words about the land being a gift, not a commodity. "I have to tell people, Sarah," he said, his voice firm. "They saved me. They saved our herd. They gave me this. I owe them." Sarah's face was a study in conflicted emotions. "Ethan, people won't understand. They'll call you a fool, a traitor. The stories, they run deep." "I know," he said, "but so does the truth. The truth is, they are not our enemies. We are all just trying to survive on this land." The next morning, Ethan woke with a sense of purpose. He spent the day tending to his herd, making sure they had enough water, and then he rode into town. The small frontier town of Harmony was a place of worn-out faces and hushed whispers. The general store, usually a hub of activity, was quiet. The saloon, usually filled with the raucous laughter of cowboys, was nearly empty. The drought had a hold on them all, a tightening grip that was slowly choking the life out of the community. Ethan dismounted in front of the saloon, a place where men came to talk, to share news and stories. A few men were sitting at a table, their faces grim. They looked up as he entered, their eyes widening in surprise. He was supposed to be dead. He was supposed to have succumbed to the unforgiving wilderness. "Ethan Stone," one of them, a grizzled old rancher named Jed, said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and wonder. "We heard you rode north. We figured you were a goner." "I was," Ethan said, his voice steady, "but I had help." He told them his story, the words flowing freely, filled with the passion of a man who had seen the world with new eyes. He spoke of the rock slide, his injuries, his rescue by Lysandra. He spoke of the Comanche, not as a faceless horde, but as a people with their own fears, their own wisdom, and their own deep connection to the land. The men listened in stunned silence, their disbelief warring with the undeniable truth of his words. They saw the new saddle, the moccasins, the look in his eyes. He wasn't lying. "They led my herd to a hidden spring," he finished, "and they gave me a new saddle and these. They saved us all." A man at the bar, a rancher named Frank, scoffed. "Comanche? Help a white man? That's a fool's tale, Ethan. They're savages. They're just waiting for a chance to kill us all and take our land." "No," Ethan said, his voice low and firm. "That's not what I saw. I saw a people who respect the land, who understand that we are all a part of it. They don't want our land, Frank. They want the rain to come back, just like us." The room was filled with a thick, heavy silence. The men were torn between their long-held beliefs and the undeniable evidence before them. Ethan was alive, his herd was safe, and he was telling them that the very people they feared were the ones who had made it possible. Jed, the old rancher, looked at Ethan, then at the others. "I'll be damned," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "He's telling the truth. I've been riding for weeks, and every creek, every spring is dry. He goes north, into the place we all avoid, and he comes back with a story like this. Maybe there's something to it." The conversation continued late into the night. Ethan answered their questions, his words filled with a quiet conviction. He spoke of the beauty of the canyon, of the ancient wisdom of the elder, of the deep sense of peace he had felt among them. He was not just sharing a story. He was sharing a glimpse into a world they had never known existed. He rode home as the moon was a silver sliver in the sky. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep sense of a new, difficult journey ahead. He had planted a seed of doubt, a seed of hope, but the roots of prejudice ran deep. He knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was long, and he was walking it, not with the heavy burden of a dying ranch, but with the fragile, hopeful burden of a messenger. Word of Ethan's miraculous return and his incredible story spread like wildfire through the dusty towns and parched ranches of the Texas Panhandle. It was a story told in saloons and general stores, whispered on porches, and debated around dinner tables. A man who had faced certain death in the wilderness had been saved by the very people his community had been taught to fear. Reactions were sharply divided. Some, like old Jed, were cautiously optimistic. The drought was a common enemy, and the idea that there was an ally, even a surprising one, was a welcome thought. They were desperate for a solution, for a hope that went beyond praying for rain. Others were vehemently opposed. The old prejudices, the stories of violence and betrayal, were too ingrained to be easily discarded. The local sheriff, a no-nonsense man named Carter, visited Ethan at his ranch. He sat on the porch, his face a grim mask. "Ethan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've heard the stories. You're a good man. But this sounds like madness. You've been gone for weeks. You've been through a trauma. The Comanche are a hostile people. They've attacked settlers. They've broken treaties. You can't just go telling folks they're friends." "I'm not saying they're friends, Sheriff," Ethan countered, his voice steady. "I'm saying they're human. I'm saying they showed me kindness when no one else would have. They saved my life, and they saved my herd. I don't see how I can deny that." Sheriff Carter shook his head. "Be careful, Ethan. There are people who won't take kindly to this. They'll see it as a sign of weakness. They'll see it as a betrayal." He looked at the new saddle, then at the moccasins. "And they'll wonder what you promised in return." Ethan stood his ground. "I promised nothing but the truth, Sheriff, and I intend to keep that promise." The sheriff left, his warning a heavy weight in the air. The truth was, the community was a tinderbox, and Ethan's story was the spark. The fear and desperation of the drought had created an environment of distrust, and his message of peace was a radical and dangerous idea. A few days later, a group of ranchers led by the skeptical Frank rode to Ethan's ranch. They were armed, their faces grim. Ethan met them at the fence line, his hand on his rifle. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice calm. Frank dismounted, his eyes hard. "We want to see the spring, Ethan, the one the Comanche supposedly showed you. We don't believe you." "I'm not a guide, Frank," Ethan said, his voice firm, "and that land is sacred to them. I won't lead you there." "Then you're lying," Frank said, a sneer on his face. "You made some kind of deal with them. You gave them something in return for your herd. You're a traitor." The accusation hung in the air, a poisonous charge. The other men, though silent, watched with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "I gave them nothing but thanks, Frank," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. "And I'm not a traitor. I'm a man who was shown a different way, a better way." The tension was palpable. A single misstep could lead to violence. Sarah stood on the porch, her hands clutched together, her face pale. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the group. "He's not lying, Frank. I've known Ethan Stone my whole life. He's an honest man." It was Jed, the old rancher. He pushed his way to the front, his gaze fixed on Frank. "We're all desperate, I know, but we can't let our fear make us turn on our own. Ethan came back with a story. Let's hear him out. Let's at least consider that maybe things aren't always what they seem." Jed's words, backed by the respect he commanded in the community, had a calming effect. The other men, though still suspicious, lowered their rifles. Frank, outmaneuvered, grunted in frustration. "This isn't over, Ethan," he said, and with a final hard look, he and his men rode away. Ethan stood there, the dust settling around him, his heart still pounding in his chest. The seeds of doubt had been planted, but so had the seeds of distrust. He knew he was on a dangerous path. He was a man caught between two worlds, a man trying to build a bridge with the very people who were afraid to cross it. He was a messenger, and the message he was carrying was a hard one to swallow. He knew he couldn't just talk. He had to act. He had to show them. But how? He had no easy answers, only a deep sense of purpose and a growing understanding that his new life as a bridge builder was going to be a lot harder than his old life as a rancher. The confrontation with Frank and his men had a profound effect on the community. It wasn't just a dispute between ranchers, it was a clash of ideologies. On one side was the old way of thinking, born of fear and prejudice. On the other was a new way, a fragile hope born of Ethan's survival and his unexpected alliance. Ethan knew that words alone were not enough. He had to show them. He had to prove that the Comanche were not a threat, but a potential ally. He spent the next few days in deep thought, his mind racing with ideas. He needed a gesture, a grand act that would prove his sincerity and challenge their prejudices. He thought back to his time in the canyon. He remembered the elders' words, "The land is angry. The Great Spirit is not pleased." He remembered their mourning, their shared burden of the drought. They were not just suffering, they were suffering with a spiritual understanding of the cause. He had a crazy idea, one that was both audacious and risky. It was a plan that would require an immense amount of trust, not only from his own community, but from the Comanche as well. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. He rode into town again, this time with a specific purpose. He didn't go to the saloon. He went to the town church, a small, simple wooden building that stood as a symbol of the community's faith. He found Pastor Miller, a kind, gentle man with a long beard and a weary look in his eyes. "Pastor," Ethan began, "I need your help." He told the pastor the entire story, leaving out no detail, not even the shame he had felt when he realized he had brought them a worthless gift. He spoke of Lysandra's wisdom, of 2 Arrows' honor, and of the elders' prophetic words. Pastor Miller listened intently, his face a study in a mixture of disbelief and deep reflection. He had always preached a message of love and forgiveness, but he had also lived a life shaped by the realities of the frontier. He had seen the suffering, the loss, the constant struggle. "Ethan," he said, his voice soft, "this is a profound story. It's a story of redemption, of a man changed by an act of grace. But it's a dangerous story. This community, they are afraid. They are angry. Their faith is being tested. They are looking for someone to blame, and the Comanche, they are an easy target." "I know," Ethan said, "but what if we could show them otherwise? What if we could show them that our faiths, our destinies, are intertwined? What if we could show them that we can all pray for the same thing?" The pastor looked at him, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "What are you proposing?" "I want to ask them for their help," Ethan said. "I want to ask the Comanche to come to our land, not to fight, not to trade, but to pray, to perform their rain dance, to show us that the land, that it can be healed, that we can be healed." Pastor Miller was silent for a long moment. It was a bold, unprecedented idea. It was a radical act of faith that would challenge everything his community believed in. It was also a dangerous one. If the gesture was met with hostility, if it was seen as a sign of weakness, it could lead to an even more violent confrontation. "Ethan," he said, his voice filled with a quiet awe, "this is the most courageous thing I have ever heard, but it is also the most dangerous. Are you willing to risk everything for this?" "I already have," Ethan said, a newfound strength in his voice. "They risked everything for me. I have to do the same for them. I have to show my people that peace is possible, that trust is possible." The pastor, a man who had dedicated his life to faith and hope, looked at Ethan, a man who had been given a second chance at life. He saw not a foolish dreamer, but a man transformed by an act of grace. He saw a man who had been given a mission. "I will help you, Ethan," he said, his voice firm. "I will call a town meeting. I will ask the community to listen to your story, and I will stand with you. Because what you are proposing, it's not just about rain. It's about healing. It's about finding a way to live on this land together, not as enemies, but as human beings." Ethan felt a surge of hope. He had found an ally, a voice of reason in a sea of prejudice. He knew the road ahead was long and filled with obstacles, but for the first time since the drought began, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond just surviving. He was a man with a mission. And his mission was to bring 2 worlds together, to build a bridge of peace, and to ask for a favor that would either change everything or destroy it all. The town hall meeting was set for a Friday evening, a time when most people would be gathering for the usual weekly gathering of gossip, news and complaints about the weather. But this evening was different. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Word had spread that Ethan Stone, the man who had supposedly been saved by the Comanche, was going to speak. The hall was packed. Ranchers, merchants, and their families sat on wooden benches, their faces a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility. Frank and his group were at the back, their expressions a grim warning. Pastor Miller stood at the front, his hands resting on the podium. He began with a simple prayer, asking for guidance and for an open heart. He then introduced Ethan, his voice filled with a quiet solemnity that held the attention of the crowd. Ethan walked to the podium, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw Sarah in the front row, her face pale, but her eyes filled with unwavering support. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He told his story from the beginning, not as a hero, but as a man who had made a mistake and had been given a second chance. He spoke of the desperation that had led him into the sacred lands, the unforgiving nature of the rockslide, and his profound fear when he first saw Lysandra. He spoke of her kindness, her quiet wisdom, and her willingness to see him as a human being, not an enemy. He spoke of 2 Arrows, a silent guide and a man of honor. He spoke of the Comanche elder, a man who saw the deeper, spiritual meaning of their shared struggle. He held up the silver buckle, a symbol of the world he had known, and then he held up the moccasins, a symbol of the world he had just discovered. "I came back here a changed man," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I came back here knowing that the stories we tell ourselves about the Comanche are not the whole truth. They are not our enemies. They are a people of honor, of dignity, and of a deep respect for the land we all share." He paused, the silence in the room so thick you could almost touch it. He knew he had them. They were listening. But now came the hard part, the part that would either change everything or lead to his ruin. "I came here tonight to ask for your help," he said, his voice filled with a new, quiet authority. "I'm asking you to do something that seems unthinkable. I want to ask the Comanche to come to our land, to our ranches, to our church." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Frank let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You want to invite savages to our homes, Ethan? Are you crazy?" "No," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on Frank. "I'm asking you to have faith. I'm asking you to see them, not as savages, but as human beings. I'm asking them to come and perform their rain dance, to pray to their great spirit for rain, to show us that we are all a part of this land, that our destinies are intertwined." The uproar was immediate. Shouts of protest, accusations of treason, and cries of disbelief filled the hall. "They'll burn our crops," a man shouted. "They'll steal our cattle," a woman cried. "This is a trap," Frank bellowed. Ethan held up his hands, his face a calm fortress against the storm. He let them vent their fears and their anger. He knew they had to get it out. He knew he had to let them see that he was not afraid of their words. When the noise subsided, he spoke again, his voice firm and unwavering. "This isn't about me. This isn't about the Comanche. This is about us. This is about our children, our families, our future. We have prayed for rain. We have done everything we know how to do, and nothing has worked. Why not try a different way? Why not trust a different kind of faith?" He looked at Pastor Miller, who stood at the side, his face a quiet encouragement. "Pastor Miller has agreed to stand with me. He has agreed to open the church to them. We are not asking them to give up their faith. We are asking them to share it, to show us a path to healing, not just for the land, but for our hearts." The words hung in the air, a profound challenge to their long-held beliefs. The silence that followed was not one of anger, but one of deep, uneasy thought. They were faced with a choice, to continue down a path of fear and desperation, or to take a leap of faith, to trust a man who had been given a second chance at life. Frank stood up, his face red with fury. "This is a betrayal, Ethan. You're putting us all at risk. We're not letting this happen. We'll stop you. We'll stop them." "Then you will have to stop me first, Frank," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "Because I am doing what is right. I am doing what a man of faith and honor must do. I am asking you to be a part of this, to choose hope over fear, to choose peace over prejudice." The meeting ended with no clear consensus. The crowd dispersed, their minds in turmoil. Ethan walked out of the hall, the weight of his mission now a shared burden. He had opened a door to an unthinkable future. He knew the path ahead was filled with danger, but he also knew that he had to walk it. He had made a promise, and he was a man who kept his promises. News of Ethan's proposal spread far beyond the confines of Harmony. It reached the Comanche encampment in the Whispering Hills, carried on the wind, and whispered by messengers who had seen the meeting for themselves. The news was met with the same kind of division and suspicion that had greeted it in town. Some warriors were enraged, seeing it as a blatant attempt to lure them into a trap. The elder of the tribe, however, listened with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Lysandra, a woman who had seen the good in Ethan, spoke for him. "He is not a man of deceit," she said, her voice firm. "He came to us in peace. He came back to thank us. He is offering a hand, not a sword." 2 Arrows, ever the watchful pragmatist, was more skeptical. "The white men have lied before, sister. This could be a trick, a way to get us out in the open." The elder held up a hand for silence. "He is not an enemy. He is a friend. He has shown us that. The question is his people ready to be our friends? Can they put aside their fear? Can they see us as we are?" The decision was not easy. It was a risk, a leap of faith that went against centuries of ingrained suspicion. But the drought was a shared burden. The land was dying, and their spiritual rituals were having no effect. They were desperate for a solution, for a sign from the Great Spirit, The elder, a man who had seen too much war and too many broken promises, saw an opportunity. He saw a chance to show the white man that they were not savages, but a people of dignity, of deep faith, and of a profound connection to the land. He sent a messenger to Ethan, a young warrior who rode with a white flag tied to his lance. The message was simple. They would come. Not all of them, but a small group led by the elder Lysandra and 2 Arrows. They would come to the town of Harmony on a date that had been agreed upon to perform their ritual. It was a sign of immense trust, a profound gesture of hope. Ethan received the news with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The hardest part was yet to come. He had to prepare his community. He had to make sure that the fragile bridge of trust he had built would not be shattered by a single act of prejudice. He went to Sheriff Carter and shared the news. The sheriff's face was a grim mask of concern. "Ethan, this is a powder keg. If anything goes wrong, it'll be a massacre. On both sides." "I know," Ethan said, "but we have to try. They are coming in peace. We have to show them that we can receive them in peace. I need your help, Sheriff. I need you to ensure that no one tries to start a fight." Sheriff Carter, a man who had always prided himself on keeping the peace, looked at Ethan for a long moment. He saw the fire in his eyes, the conviction in his voice. He was a man changed, a man on a mission. "I'll do what I can," he said, his voice low, "but I can't guarantee anything." The days leading up to the meeting were filled with a tense, uneasy silence. The ranchers were divided, some openly hostile, others quietly curious. Frank and his group were nowhere to be seen, a fact that made Ethan even more nervous. He knew they were planning something. He knew they would not let this happen. On the day of the meeting, the town of Harmony was a scene of quiet, nervous anticipation. The main street was lined with people, their faces a mix of fear, curiosity, and apprehension. The church stood at the end of the street, its doors wide open, a beacon of hope and a symbol of an unthinkable alliance. Ethan, dressed in his Sunday best, stood with Pastor Miller on the steps of the church. They waited, their hearts in their throats, for a sign. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, a slow, steady tide moving towards them. The crowd hushed, their eyes fixed on the approaching figures. It was them, the Comanche. The small group, led by the elder Lysandra and 2 Arrows, rode into town, their horses' hooves making a soft thud on the dusty street. They were a vision of quiet dignity, their faces painted with the symbols of their tribe, their headdresses adorned with feathers. They were not a war party. They were a delegation of peace. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their long-held prejudices warring with the reality before them. Ethan walked forward, his heart pounding, and met them in the middle of the street. He looked at Lysandra, and he saw a quiet sense of hope in her eyes. He looked at 2 Arrows, and he saw a deep, unshakable trust. He looked at the elder, and he saw a profound wisdom, a man who had risked everything for a chance at peace. "Welcome," Ethan said, his voice filled with emotion. "You are our guests. We are honored to have you here." The elder dismounted and stood face to face with Ethan. He held out his hand, a gesture of peace and trust. Ethan took it, and in that moment, the chasm between their 2 worlds seemed to shrink to nothing. The crowd watched in stunned silence, a single, unifying breath. The bridge had been built. Now they had to see if it would hold. The church, a place of silent prayer and somber hymns, had been transformed. The wooden benches had been moved aside to create a large, open space. The Comanche, led by the elder and Lysandra, walked in with a quiet, respectful solemnity. They saw the cross on the altar, the stained glass windows, the symbols of a faith that was not their own, but they showed no sign of hostility or disrespect. The townsfolk, a mixture of ranchers, farmers, and their families, watched from the back of the church, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. They were witnessing something that had never happened before, something that went against everything they had been taught to believe. The elder walked to the center of the open space. He carried a small, leather-bound drum, and Lysandra held a bundle of dried herbs and feathers. They stood in the middle of the church, a small, defiant symbol of a different kind of faith. The elder began to chant, his voice a low, melodic hum that filled the church with a strange and beautiful sound. It was not a prayer for fire and brimstone, but a song of reverence for the earth, for the wind, for the water that gave all life. He spoke of the Great Spirit, of the balance of nature, and of the need for all living things to be in harmony. Lysandra joined him, her voice a soaring, ethereal counterpoint. She walked around the circle, her body swaying in a slow, rhythmic dance. She held a feather in her hand, and she moved with a quiet, powerful grace, as if she were a part of the very air she breathed. The scent of the burning herbs filled the church, a rich, earthy smell that was both foreign and intoxicating. The townsfolk watched in stunned silence. They had expected something strange, something savage, but this was a ritual of profound beauty and deep reverence. This was not a war dance, it was a prayer for the same thing they had been praying for so long in their own way. The elder and Lysandra continued their chant, the drum beat growing louder, a steady hypnotic rhythm that seemed to vibrate in the very core of the earth. The air felt charged with a strange, powerful energy. The windows of the church, usually so bright and clear, seemed to dim, as if a cloud were passing overhead. The children, who had been watching with wide, curious eyes, began to sway to the rhythm of the drum. The adults, their faces a study in conflicted emotions, were slowly drawn into the moment. The prejudices that had been ingrained for so long were beginning to crumble, replaced by a sense of shared humanity. Suddenly a voice rang out from the back of the church. "This is sacrilege!" It was Frank, his face red with fury. He had been hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. He drew a pistol, and the sound of the cocking hammer echoed through the silent church like a thunderclap. "This is a perversion of God's house. Get out, you heathen!" Chaos erupted. People screamed, children cried, and the Comanche warriors, who had been standing at the back of the church, moved to protect their elder. 2 arrows drew his knife, his eyes fixed on Frank. The fragile bridge of trust was about to be shattered. "Frank, no!" Ethan yelled. He ran to the center of the church, his body shielding the elder and Lysandra. "Put the gun down! This is a house of peace!" Sheriff Carter, who had been watching from the front, drew his own pistol and leveled it at Frank. "Put the gun down, Frank! Now!" Frank, a man blinded by fear and prejudice, hesitated. He looked at Ethan, at the sheriff, at the faces of his neighbors, a mixture of fear and disappointment. He looked at the quiet dignity of the elder and Lysandra, and something inside him seemed to break. His hand trembled, and with a grunt of frustration, he lowered the gun. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. It was a silence of a moment that had been on the precipice of tragedy, a moment that had been saved by the grace of a single man. The elder, unfazed by the commotion, continued his chant, his voice a steady, unwavering song of hope. Lysandra, her eyes filled with tears, began to dance again, her movements filled with a new, powerful grace. And then it happened. A single drop of water hit the dusty window pane, followed by another and another. A low murmur went through the crowd as they turned to look at the sky. A heavy, bruised cloud, a presence that had been absent for so long, had gathered over the town. The rain began to fall. Not a fierce, raging storm, but a soft, gentle drizzle that was both a blessing and a miracle. It was a sound they had almost forgotten, the sound of life returning to the earth. The church was filled with the sound of weeping. Men and women hardened by years of drought cried openly, their hearts filled with a sense of profound relief and wonder. They had witnessed a miracle, a moment when 2 worlds had come together in a shared moment of hope, and the heavens had answered their combined prayer. The rain was not just water. It was a symbol of healing, a sign that the land and their hearts could be healed. The rain was a soft, steady rhythm on the roof of the church, a gentle chorus that accompanied the quiet reverence that had settled over the town. The Comanche, their rain dance complete, stood in a silent circle, their faces turned towards the windows, their eyes filled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had done what they had promised. They had brought the rain. The townsfolk, their hearts filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude, watched as the rain washed the dust from the streets, and a sweet, earthy smell rose from the ground. The drought, a relentless force that had defined their lives for so long, was finally beginning to loosen its grip. Ethan walked to the center of the circle, his heart full. He looked at the faces of the Comanche, and he saw not strangers, but friends. He looked at the faces of his community, and he saw not suspicion, but a new, tentative hope. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the bottom of our hearts, thank you." The elder of the tribe, his face a serene mask, looked at Ethan. "The Great Spirit heard your heart, Ethan Stone. He heard the heart of your people. He heard the heart of the land. This rain, It is a gift for all of us, a promise that we can live in peace." The words hung in the air, a profound and simple truth. They were a gift, a promise, a sign that their shared burden had been recognized and answered. Frank, a man humbled by his own foolishness and the overwhelming power of the moment, walked to the center of the church. He looked at Ethan, then at the elder. He held out his hand to the Comanche leader, a gesture of profound apology and newfound respect. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low and filled with shame. "I was a fool. I am sorry." The elder looked at his hand, then at his face, and with a small, gracious nod, he took it. The handshake, a simple gesture of reconciliation, was more powerful than any treaty, more meaningful than any law. It was a moment of healing, a moment when the past was forgiven and a new future was born. As the rain continued to fall, the two communities began to mingle, a quiet, cautious mingling at first, but with each passing moment, the walls of prejudice began to fall. The children, free from the biases of their parents, were the first to cross the lines. They ran to the back of the church, where the Comanche children were standing, and they began to play, their laughter a beautiful, joyful sound that was a testament to the power of a shared humanity. The adults watched, their hearts filled with a quiet sense of wonder. They had been taught to fear the Comanche, to see them as a threat, but what they saw was a people of dignity, of faith, and of a deep, abiding connection to the land they all loved. They had been brought together by a shared burden, and they had found a shared solution. As the rain began to subside, the elder announced that they would be leaving. They had done what they had come to do. They had brought the rain, and they had opened a door to a new future. Ethan walked with them to their horses, his heart filled with a deep sense of gratitude and a new, unspoken promise. He knew that this was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. He looked at Lysandra, a woman who had saved his life and changed his world, and he saw a silent understanding in her eyes. The bridge was built. Now, they had to make sure it was strong enough to last. He watched as they rode away, a silent procession disappearing into the horizon. The rain had stopped and the sun, a soft golden orb, began to break through the clouds. A brilliant rainbow, a promise of a new beginning, arched across the sky. A beautiful, powerful symbol of two worlds, now connected. He stood there for a long time, the cool, fresh air on his face. A man who had gone into the wild, a desperate rancher, and had come back a messenger of peace. He had a family to return to, a ranch to rebuild, and a new, important role to play. He had been given a second chance at life, and he knew with a certainty that went bone deep that he would not waste it. He had a mission to heal the land and the hearts of the people who lived on it, and he knew in that moment that the journey was just beginning. The days that followed the rain were a strange and beautiful blur. The landscape, once a palette of ochre and bone, was now a vibrant tapestry of green. The grass, a faint, almost invisible thread just a few weeks ago, was now a thick, lush carpet. The creeks, once parched and cracked, were now babbling brooks, their waters a clear, life-giving current. The air, no longer filled with the suffocating dust, was clean and fragrant with the scent of wet earth and wild sage. Ethan, a man who had been defined by desperation, was now defined by a quiet, determined hope. The ranch was thriving. His herd, once on the brink of death, was now healthy and strong, their bellies full of the new, vibrant grass. His family, once etched with worry and fear, was now filled with laughter and a newfound sense of security. The smiles on his children's faces, the deep, abiding peace in Sarah's eyes, were a daily testament to the miracle he had witnessed. But the miracle wasn't just in the rain, it was in the change that had taken root in the hearts of the community. The townsfolk of Harmony, once so suspicious and divided, were now a united front. The rain had been a catalyst, a physical manifestation of a spiritual change. The sight of the Comanche and the townsfolk, sharing a moment of faith in the church, had shattered the old prejudices. The sound of the children playing together, their laughter echoing in the newly green fields, was a promise of a future that was no longer defined by fear. Frank, a man humbled and transformed, had become one of Ethan's most vocal allies. He had visited the ranch, offering his help with mending fences and tending to the herd. He had spoken to his neighbors, his voice filled with a quiet conviction, telling them of the moment of grace he had witnessed. He had become a bridge builder in his own right, a testament to the power of forgiveness and redemption. Ethan knew that his work was not done. The unspoken promise he had made to the elder was still a powerful weight on his shoulders. He had promised to be a messenger, to bridge the gap between their two worlds. The rain had been a good start, but he knew that true peace and understanding would not be built on a single gesture. It would be built on a foundation of continued effort, of shared purpose and of a deep, abiding respect. He spent his days working on the ranch, but his mind was on the horizon, on the quiet, spiritual presence of the Comanche. He knew he had to do something to honor their trust, to show them that their act of faith had not been in vain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a riot of fiery colors, Ethan sat on his porch with Sarah. "I have to go back," he said, his voice low and firm. "Not for water this time, but to offer something in return, something more than a sack of flour and a silver buckle." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know," she said, her hand resting on his arm. "What will you offer them?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but it has to be a gift of the heart, a gift that shows them that we have not forgotten, a gift that shows them that we are ready to share this land, not to conquer it." He spent the next few days in deep contemplation, his mind filled with a whirlwind of ideas. He thought of all the things he had, all the things his community had. He thought of the cattle, the horses, the land itself, but none of those things felt right. They were things of his world, things that the Comanche saw as a commodity, not a gift. He thought back to the rain dance, to the chant, to the powerful connection they had with the land. He thought of the elder's words, "The land, it is a gift, not a thing to be owned." The answer came to him one morning, as he was watching his children play in the newly green field. He saw them laughing, their small bodies a part of the landscape. They were a part of the land, a part of the future. He realized that the greatest gift he could offer was not a thing, but a promise of a shared future, a promise of a new way of living on the land. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back to the canyon, not with a gift, but with a question that would either unite them forever or shatter the fragile peace he had worked so hard to build. It was a risk, a leap of faith that went beyond anything he had ever done before. But he was a man who had learned that true peace was not found in a safe harbor, but in the open, uncharted waters of trust and understanding. And he was a man who was no longer afraid of the journey. He was a man who had found his purpose, and his purpose was to build a bridge that would last a lifetime. The journey back to the sacred lands was different this time. Ethan was not riding with the frantic desperation of a dying rancher. He was riding with the calm, measured purpose of a messenger. He was not a man seeking salvation, but a man seeking to give a gift. He was a man who was no longer afraid of the unknown, but who was ready to embrace it. He rode for days, his new saddle a comfortable and familiar presence beneath him. He was no longer a stranger to the land. He saw the subtle signs, the faint tracks, the quiet rhythms of the wilderness. He was a part of it, a part of a story that was no longer just his own, but a story of two peoples, two worlds coming together. He reached the canyon, the entrance to the sacred lands, and he dismounted, a profound sense of reverence settling over him. He walked into the canyon, his boots silent on the soft earth. He followed the path that Two Arrows had shown him, the path that led to the heart of the Comanche encampment. He found them in the same sheltered cove, their fires burning low, their conversations a quiet murmur that was a part of the landscape. They saw him approaching, and a few of the younger warriors tensed, their hands on their weapons. But the elder, a man who had seen a new kind of courage in Ethan, held up a hand. "He is a friend," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. Ethan walked into the circle, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw Lysandra, her face a serene mask, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. He saw Two Arrows, his face a stoic mask, but his eyes holding a glimmer of respect. He saw the elder, a man whose wisdom had saved not only his life, but his world. He stood in the center of the circle, and he took a deep breath. "I have come back," he said, his voice strong and clear. "Not because I am in need of water, but because I have come to offer a gift." The elder looked at him, his face unreadable. "You have already given us a gift, Ethan Stone. You have given us a gift of trust. You have given us a gift of rain. We need nothing more." "No," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet passion. "I have not given you the greatest gift I can offer. I have come back to offer you a new way of living on this land." The crowd murmured, their faces filled with confusion. What could this white man offer them that they didn't already have? "The rain has come," Ethan said, his voice filled with emotion. "But the drought, it was a sign that we must change, a sign that we must learn to live with the land, not against it. My people, we see the land as a thing to be owned, as something that we can take from. We have built fences and we have cut down the trees, and the land, it has turned its back on us." He looked at the elder, then at Lysandra and Two Arrows. "Your people, you understand the land. You live in harmony with it. You see it as a living, breathing being. My people, how we have lost that. We have lost our way." He took a deep breath, and he asked the question that had been burning in his heart for days. "I have come back to ask you, to teach us how to live with the land, to teach us how to read the signs, to teach us how to respect the Great Spirit, to teach us a new way of living." The silence that followed was so profound, it felt unnatural. The Comanche people, a people who had been taught to mistrust the white man, were faced with a request that was so profound, so unexpected, that it challenged everything they believed. A white man, a rancher, was asking them, their supposed enemies, to be their teachers. The elder looked at Ethan for a long, silent moment. He saw not a man trying to take something, but a man trying to give something. He saw a man who had seen the errors of his ways and was now seeking a path to redemption. He saw a man who was willing to humble himself, to set aside his pride, and to learn from the very people he had been taught to fear. The elder spoke, his voice a low, solemn rumble. Lysandra translated, her own voice filled with a quiet awe. He says, "Your request, it is a great honor, a great and sacred honor." He says, "You are not just a man, Ethan Stone. You are a bridge that can connect two worlds, a bridge that can heal the wounds of the past." The elder looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with a profound wisdom. "We will teach you, Ethan Stone. We will teach you what we know of the land, but we ask for something in return. We ask for a promise that you will share what you learn with your people, a promise that you will teach them to live with the land, not against it, a promise that you will teach them to see us not as enemies, but as friends." "I promise," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise on my family. I promise on the land. I will be your student and I will be your messenger." And so a new chapter began, not with a battle, but with a promise, not with a treaty, but with a handshake, not with a fight, but with a quiet, solemn agreement to build a bridge between two worlds, a bridge that would not only bring rain to the land, but would also bring peace to the hearts of the people who lived on it. The education of Ethan Stone began immediately and was unlike any he had ever received. It was not a matter of books and numbers, but of senses and spirit. His teachers were the land and its people. He spent his days in the company of the Comanche, learning to see the world through their eyes. Lysandra was his primary guide. She taught him to identify the different plants and their uses, not just for medicine, but for food, for dyes, and for weaving. She showed him how to track animals, not just by their footprints, but by the subtle bend of a twig, the faint scent on the wind. She taught him to read the sky, not just for clouds, but for the silent language of the seasons, the whispers of the Great Spirit. He learned their language, a slow, painstaking process that was filled with laughter and a deep sense of shared purpose. He learned the names of the trees, the rivers, the mountains, and the stars. He learned their songs, their stories, and their dances. He learned that their faith was not in a distant, invisible God, but in the land itself, in the living, breathing world that sustained them all. Two Arrows, a man who had once been a silent sentinel, became a patient teacher. He taught Ethan to hunt with a bow and arrow, not as a sport, but as a ritual of respect. He taught him to be a part of the hunt, to understand the needs of the animal, to give thanks for the life that was given. He taught him to move silently through the land, to become a part of the shadows, to listen with his whole body. Ethan, a man who had once prided himself on his independence, found himself becoming a student, a man who was willing to set aside his pride and learn from a people he had once been taught to despise. He saw the wisdom in their ways, the deep, abiding peace that came from living in harmony with the land. He saw a way of life that was not about conquering, but about coexisting. He would return to his ranch every few days, his mind filled with a whirlwind of new ideas and a sense of profound change. He would share his stories with Sarah and the children, his eyes filled with a new kind of light. He would show them the herbs he had learned to identify, the songs he had learned to sing, the stories he had learned to tell. Sarah, a woman who had once been filled with fear, was now filled with a quiet sense of wonder. She saw the change in her husband, the deep sense of peace that had settled over him. She saw the light in his eyes, the strength in his voice, and she knew that the journey he had taken had not only saved his life, but had also saved his soul. The community, once so suspicious, was now filled with a quiet curiosity. They saw the change in Ethan, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he looked at the world. They saw the ranch, a beacon of life in a world that was still struggling to recover from the drought. They began to ask questions, to listen to his stories, to see the Comanche not as a threat, but as a source of wisdom. Frank, a man who had once been a symbol of prejudice, was now a bridge builder in his own right. He would come to the ranch and he would listen to Ethan's stories, his face filled with a quiet sense of awe. He had seen the power of their faith, the power of their connection to the land, and he had been humbled by it. The Comanche, in turn, began to visit the ranch, a small, cautious exchange at first, but with each passing day, the trust grew. They brought gifts of woven blankets and hand-carved bowls. Ethan and Sarah, in return, offered them hospitality, a warm meal, and a shared space of peace and understanding. The two communities were not yet a single entity, but they were no longer two separate worlds. They were two paths, now walking in the same direction, guided by a shared respect for the land and a shared understanding of their own humanity. The rain had been a gift. The lessons were a gift, and the unspoken promise, the promise to build a bridge of peace, was a gift that would continue to grow, a living, breathing testament to the power of a man who had dared to trust and a people who had dared to teach. The seasons turned, and the land, once a parched desert, was now a thriving landscape of life and abundance. The grass grew thick and tall, the creeks ran full, and the air was filled with the sounds of a world that had been reborn. The harvest, a source of worry and despair just a year ago, was now a joyous celebration. But the harvest was not just of crops. It was of a new understanding, a new way of living. Ethan, a man who had once measured his wealth in acres and head of cattle, now measured it in knowledge and friendship. He had learned from the Comanche how to farm with the land, not against it. He had learned to use the natural rhythms of the earth, to plant in harmony with the seasons, to give back to the soil what he took from it. His methods, once viewed with skepticism by his neighbors, were now being emulated. The community, seeing the incredible success of his ranch, began to ask for his advice. He taught them what he had learned, sharing the ancient wisdom of the Comanche, a wisdom that was now a part of his own. He spoke to them of the importance of living in balance, of respecting the land, of seeing it not as a thing to be owned, but as a living, breathing entity that sustained them all. He spoke of the Comanche, not as enemies, but as teachers, as friends, as a people who had shown them a better way. The local newspaper, a small dusty publication that usually reported on cattle prices and local gossip, ran a front-page story on Ethan and his new methods. The headline read, "The Rancher Who Found Peace in the Wilderness," and it told the story of his journey, of his encounter with the Comanche, and of the profound change that had taken root in his heart. The story spread far beyond the confines of the Texas Panhandle. It was picked up by larger newspapers in Kansas City, in Denver, and even in New York. People, weary of the constant conflict and the relentless march of a world that seemed to be losing its soul, were captivated by the story of a rancher who had found a new way of living, a new way of being, on the frontier. Letters began to arrive at the small post office in Harmony, letters from people who had read the story and who were filled with a new sense of hope. They were from farmers who were struggling with the same issues, from city dwellers who were longing for a connection to the land, from people who were simply tired of a world that seemed to be filled with so much hate and so much division. Ethan, a man who had once been a simple rancher, was now a symbol of a new way of living, a new way of seeing the world. He was a messenger, a bridge builder, a man who had dared to dream of a world where two peoples could live together in peace. He continued his visits to the Comanche encampment, and the friendship between their two communities grew stronger with each passing day. The Comanche, in turn, began to come to the town of Harmony more often, to trade their beautiful handcrafted goods for the goods of the townsfolk. The exchanges were filled with a quiet sense of respect and a shared understanding. The children, a symbol of a new generation, played together in the streets, their laughter a beautiful, joyful sound that was a testament to the power of a world that was no longer divided. The elder of the tribe, a man who had seen a lifetime of prejudice and hatred, looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with a quiet sense of pride. "You have kept your promise, Ethan Stone," he said, his voice a low, solemn rumble. "You have taught your people to see. You have taught them to listen. You have taught them to respect the land. You are not just a rancher, you are a bridge that will stand for a long, long time." Ethan, a man filled with a profound sense of purpose, looked at the world around him. He saw the green fields, the clear water, the happy faces of his family, his friends, and the people who had become a part of his life. He saw a world that had been on the brink of despair, but that had been saved by a simple act of kindness, by a single act of faith. He was a man who had found his purpose in the most unlikely of places, and he knew with a certainty that went bone deep that his story was not just his own. It was a story of hope, a story of healing, a story of a new dawn. The peace that had settled over the Texas Panhandle was a beautiful but fragile thing. Like a perfect day that holds the unspoken promise of a storm, the tranquility was not meant to last. Ethan, in his newfound role as a bridge builder, had become a lightning rod, a symbol of a new world that some were not ready to embrace. Word of his alliance with the Comanche and his radical new methods of farming had reached the ears of those who saw the frontier not as a place for coexistence but for conquest. A man named Silas, a wealthy and powerful cattle baron from Kansas, saw the growing friendship between the ranchers of Harmony and the Comanche not as a sign of progress, but as a threat to his business. Silas was a man of the old world, a man who measured his worth in acres and in the number of enemies he had vanquished. He had no time for savages or for foolish notions of peace. He saw the land as a commodity, a thing to be bought and sold, to be used until it was dry and then to be discarded. He rode into Harmony with a small army of hired guns, their faces grim and their eyes filled with a cold, ruthless ambition. They were not there to reason. They were there to conquer. Ethan, a man who had become accustomed to a new kind of peace, saw the approaching riders and felt a cold knot of dread form in the pit of his stomach. He knew with a certainty that went bone deep that his new world was about to be put to the ultimate test. He rode to the center of town, his face a grim mask of determination. He found Sheriff Carter, who stood at the center of the street, his hand on his pistol, his face a grim warning. "They're here, Sheriff," Ethan said, his voice low. "Silas, he's here." Silas rode into town, a sneer on his face, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "So you're the one," he said, his voice a low, mocking rumble. "The rancher who makes friends with savages, the man who thinks he can stop progress with a few kind words and a few newfangled ideas." "This isn't about progress, Silas," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's about survival. It's about learning to live with the land. It's about learning to live with each other." Silas let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Live with them. They're nothing but a pestilence, a roadblock to a better future. I'm here to buy up the land, to expand my empire. And if they get in the ways, well, we'll deal with them." He looked at the townsfolk, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. "I'm offering you a chance to join me," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "A chance to get rid of this pestilence once and for all. A chance to be a part of a new, glorious empire. A chance to get rid of this man who's filled your heads with foolish ideas." The townsfolk looked at Ethan, then at Silas, their hearts torn between the old way and the new. They had seen the kindness of the Comanche. They had seen the wisdom of their ways. But they were also afraid. They were afraid of a man who held a gun in his hand and a cold, ruthless ambition in his heart. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "No," he said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "We will not join you, Silas. We will not betray our friends. We will not betray the promise we have made to the land. We will not betray the promise we have made to ourselves." Silas's face hardened. He looked at Ethan, a man who was standing in his way, a man who was challenging his authority, and his eyes filled with a cold, ruthless ambition. "Then you have made a grave mistake, Ethan Stone," he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "You have chosen a foolish path. You have chosen a path that will lead to your ruin." He gestured to his men, and the men began to ride, their horses kicking up a cloud of dust, their eyes fixed on the Comanche encampment in the Whispering Hills. Ethan's heart sank. He knew what they were doing. They were going to start a war that would destroy the peace he had worked so hard to build, a war that would turn the land he loved into a battlefield, a war that would unravel everything he had fought for. The news of Silas's impending attack reached the Comanche encampment with a speed that was both terrifying and miraculous. A young Comanche boy, who had been playing with Ethan's son Sam, had seen the riders and had ridden back to his people, his face pale with fear. The elder, a man who had seen too much war in his lifetime, knew that the peace they had built was now on the brink of being shattered. He looked at Lysandra and 2 arrows, and he knew that they had to make a choice. A choice between fighting a war that they did not want to fight, and a choice between standing and fighting for the peace that they had built. Lysandra, her face a serene mask, looked at the elder. "He came to us in peace," she said, her voice a quiet, powerful force. "He came to us with a promise. We must stand with him. We must show them that we are not afraid." 2 arrows, a man who had been a warrior his entire life, nodded in agreement. "We have a new friend, elder, a new ally, a new family. We will not abandon them. We will fight for the peace that we have built." The elder, a man who had seen the wisdom of their words, nodded in agreement. "Then it is so," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "We will not fight for war. We will fight for peace. We will fight for the land that is our mother. We will fight for the future that is our children." Meanwhile, back in Harmony, Ethan was not waiting for the inevitable. He was a man of action, a man who had learned that true peace was not a passive thing but an active thing. He rode to every ranch in the community, his voice filled with a new kind of authority. He spoke to them of the coming war, of the ruthless ambition of Silas, of the threat that was coming to their land. But he did not speak of fear. He spoke of hope. He spoke of the promise they had made to each other. He spoke of the promise they had made to the Comanche. "This is not just their fight," he said, his voice a powerful unifying force. "This is our fight. This is a fight for the future of this land. This is a fight for a world where we can all live in peace. We can't let them take it from us. We have to stand together. We have to fight for what is right." The community, a people who had been transformed by the rain and by the friendship of the Comanche, listened to his words, and they were filled with a new, powerful sense of purpose. The men, once so divided, were now united. They saddled their horses, they grabbed their rifles, and they stood with Ethan, their faces a grim, determined mask. Frank, a man who had once been a symbol of prejudice, stood beside Ethan, his hand on his shoulder. "We're with you, Ethan," he said, his voice a low, solemn rumble. "All the way. We're fighting for a new way, a better way." As the sun began to set, casting long, fiery shadows across the landscape, the 2 forces met. The hired guns of Silas, a cold, ruthless army of mercenaries, and the ranchers of Harmony, a small but determined group of men who were fighting for their homes, for their families, and for their future. But they were not alone. As the 2 sides faced each other, a new cloud of dust rose on the horizon. The Comanche, a silent, powerful force of warriors, rode into the scene, their faces painted with the symbols of their tribe, their bows and arrows at the ready. Silas, a man who had planned for a quick, brutal battle, looked at the approaching Comanche, and his eyes filled with a cold, disbelieving fury. "You fools!" he bellowed, his voice filled with a venomous rage. "You're fighting with savages. You're going to get yourselves killed." "No," Ethan said, his voice a quiet, powerful force. "We're fighting with our friends, Silas. We're fighting for a future that is not about conquest, but about coexistence. And we're not going to let you take it from us." The standoff was a moment of profound, breathtaking tension. The silence was thick and heavy, filled with the unspoken promise of a war that would either destroy them all or change the world forever. The 2 armies faced each other, a symbol of 2 worlds, 2 ways of living, and a single, unified hope for a better future. The stage was set for the final, epic battle, a battle for the soul of the frontier. The silence was shattered by a single gunshot, not from Silas's men, but from Sheriff Carter, who had been watching from the sidelines, his face a grim, determined mask. He shot a single, clean shot into the air, a sign that the law was now a part of this fight. "This is an armed conflict, Silas," the sheriff said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "I'm the law here, and I'm telling you, this is a fight that you are not going to win." Silas's face hardened, his eyes filled with a cold, ruthless ambition. "The law? You're a fool, Sheriff. I'm the law here. The law of money. The law of power." He gestured to his men, and the battle began. But it was not a battle of brute force. It was a battle of strategy, of heart, and of a deep, abiding connection to the land. Ethan and his men, guided by the wisdom of 2 arrows and the strategic genius of the Comanche, fought with a sense of purpose that was a powerful contrast to the cold, ruthless efficiency of Silas's men. They were fighting for their homes, for their families, for their future. And they were fighting with a deep, abiding respect for the land that was their mother. The Comanche warriors, a silent, powerful force, moved with a fluid, effortless grace, their bows and arrows a quiet, lethal force. They were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for peace. They were fighting for a way of life that was about living in harmony with the land. The battle raged for hours, a brutal, chaotic maelstrom of gunfire, arrows, and hand-to-hand combat. Ethan, a man who had once been a simple rancher, fought with a fierce, determined courage. He fought not just for his life, but for the new life he had found. He fought for the promise he had made. He saw Frank, a man who had once been filled with so much prejudice, fighting with a sense of purpose that was a testament to the power of a changed heart. He saw Sheriff Carter, a man who had once been so cautious, now fighting with a fierce, determined resolve. He saw the Comanche warriors, a symbol of a new kind of alliance, fighting with a quiet, powerful grace. As the battle wore on, it became clear that Silas's army was no match for the unified force of the 2 communities. They were fighting with a purpose that was greater than just money or power. They were fighting for a future that was no longer defined by hate, but by a shared humanity. Silas, a man who had never known defeat, saw his army of mercenaries begin to crumble. He saw his men, a cold, ruthless force, being defeated by a small but determined group of ranchers and a silent, powerful force of Comanche warriors. He saw the world he had built begin to unravel. He looked at Ethan, a man who had dared to stand in his way, a man who had dared to challenge his authority, and his eyes filled with a cold, ruthless ambition. He drew his pistol, his face a grim mask of a man who was about to lose everything. "I'll kill you, Ethan Stone," he bellowed, his voice filled with a venomous rage. "I'll kill you and all your friends. I'll show you what a real man is." But before he could pull the trigger, a single, clean shot rang out. It was Lysandra, her face a serene mask, her bow and arrow at the ready. The arrow flew true, hitting him in the shoulder, a non-lethal but painful blow that brought him to his knees. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a cold, disbelieving fury. He looked at Ethan, a man who was now standing over him, and he saw not a man who was filled with anger, but a man who was filled with a profound, quiet sense of sorrow. "It didn't have to be this way, Silas," Ethan said, his voice low and filled with a quiet sense of disappointment. "You could have chosen a different path." Silas, a man who had lived his life by the law of money and power, looked at him, and for the first time in his life he saw the face of a man who was truly free. He had no answer. He had no words. He had only a profound sense of a world that had crumbled around him. The battle was over. The peace once so fragile was now a hard-won victory. The land, once a battlefield, was now a testament to the power of a new kind of alliance, a new kind of future. The aftermath of the battle was a somber but hopeful affair. The wounded were tended to, both from the ranchers and the Comanche. They were a single unified force now, a single unified purpose. The dead were buried with a shared sense of loss, and a shared sense of a future that would be built on the sacrifice of their lives. Silas and his remaining men were captured, and they were taken to town, their faces grim and filled with a cold, ruthless ambition that had been soundly defeated. Sheriff Carter, a man who had once been so cautious, was now a man of a quiet, determined courage. He stood at the center of town, a symbol of a law that was no longer just about power, but about justice. The day after the battle, the Comanche, a silent, powerful force, returned to their encampment. Ethan and a small group of ranchers rode with them, their hearts filled with a profound sense of gratitude and a new, unspoken promise. He stood with the elder of the tribe, a man who had seen too much war in his lifetime, and he looked at the world around him. He saw the green fields, the clear water, the happy faces of the children who were now playing together, their laughter a beautiful, joyful sound that was a testament to the power of a world that was no longer divided. "You have given us a great gift, Ethan Stone," the elder said, his voice a low, solemn rumble. "You have given us a gift of peace. You have given us a gift of a new future." "No," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet sense of humility. "You gave me the gift. You gave me a gift of wisdom. You gave me a gift of a new way of living. You gave me a gift of a new kind of family." The elder looked at him, his eyes filled with a profound wisdom. "The gift, it was for all of us," he said. "The land, it is a gift for all of us, and the peace, it is a gift that we must all protect." And so a new chapter began, not with a treaty but with a handshake, not with a battle but with a shared victory, not with a war but with a shared sense of purpose. The ranches of the Texas Panhandle, a place that had once been defined by conflict and division, was now a place of a new kind of peace. The ranchers and the Comanche, once so separated, were now a single, unified force. They shared their knowledge, their stories, their lives. They built a bridge that was not made of wood or stone, but of trust, of understanding, and of a deep, abiding respect. Ethan, a man who had once been a simple rancher, was now a leader. He was a man who had found his purpose in the most unlikely of places. He was a man who had been given a second chance at life, and he had used it to build a world that was a testament to the power of a single, simple act of kindness. His story was not just his own. It was a story of a community that had been on the brink of despair, but that had been saved by a shared faith, a shared hope, and a shared understanding of their own humanity. It was a story of a new kind of legacy, a legacy that was not about money or power, but about a deep, abiding peace that would stand for a long, long time. Years passed. The Texas Panhandle, once a symbol of the harsh, unforgiving frontier, was now a beacon of a new way of living. The ranches, once defined by fences and division, were now a part of a larger, interconnected whole. The Comanche and the townsfolk, once so separated, were now a single, unified community. The old ways of life were not forgotten. The ranchers still rode their horses, still tended to their cattle, still worked the land with their hands, but they did so with a new understanding, a new sense of purpose. They had learned from the Comanche how to live in harmony with the land, how to respect the natural rhythms of the earth, how to give back what they took. The Comanche, in turn, had learned from the ranchers. They had learned to farm with a new kind of efficiency, to use new tools to build a new kind of future for their children. They had built a bridge that was not just about peace, but about a shared legacy. Ethan and Sarah, a couple who had once been defined by their struggle, were now defined by their peace. Their children, Lily and Sam, had grown up in a world that was a testament to their parents' courage. They had grown up knowing both cultures, both languages, both ways of life. They were a part of a new generation, a generation that was no longer defined by a divided past, but by a shared future. Lysandra and Two Arrows, a sister and brother who had once been guardians of a sacred and forbidden world, were now leaders of a new kind of alliance. They had taught their people to trust, and they had been rewarded with a peace that was more profound than any victory. They had built a world where two peoples could live together, not as enemies, but as friends. The final scene of the story takes place on a warm summer evening. The sun, a soft golden orb, is setting, casting a long fiery shadow across the land. Ethan, now an old man, is sitting on his porch, his wife Sarah beside him. He is watching his grandchildren, a beautiful, joyful mixture of two cultures, playing in the fields. He sees them laughing, their small bodies a part of the landscape. He sees them, their hands in the hands of their Comanche friends, their laughter a beautiful, joyful sound that is a testament to the power of a world that is no longer divided. The old elder of the tribe, a man who had seen a lifetime of prejudice and hatred, walks to the porch, his face a peaceful, serene mask. He sits beside Ethan, and together they watch the children play. "You have kept your promise, Ethan Stone," the elder says, his voice a low, solemn rumble. "You have built a bridge. Had a bridge that will stand forever." Ethan, his heart filled with a profound sense of peace, nods his head. He looks at the world around him. He sees the green fields, the clear water, the happy faces of his family, his friends, and the people who had become a part of his life. He sees a world that had been on the brink of despair, but that had been saved by a single act of kindness, by a single act of faith. He sees a world that is no longer about a broken past, but about a shared future. The story of the rancher who entered sacred land by mistake, the woman who found him, and the community that was changed forever, has come to a close. But the legacy of their story, a legacy of a shared humanity, a shared purpose, and a shared love for the land, will live on. A beautiful, timeless testament to the power of a single, simple act of kindness, a single, simple act of faith, and the promise of a better future.